President Obama and the NSA trying to strike a balance between privacy, security, and politics. This is Special Report. Good evening, I'm Brett Baer. President Obama is trying to thread the needle tonight between civil libertarians at home and his counterparts around the world who want less government surveillance and the reality of living in a dangerous world. Today, he unveiled a compromise which, like so many others, satisfies few and leaves many complaining. Chief White House correspondent Ed Henry has tonight's top story.
It is not enough for leaders to say, trust us, we won't abuse the data we collect.
This was less about major change and more about President Obama trying to reassure a public battered by a series of revelations. A speech delivered with the classic marks of the Obama leadership style. Stress he's heard all sides of the debate before deciding he's not really ready to decide.
Those who are troubled by our existing programs are not interested in repeating the tragedy of 9/11. And those who defend these programs are not dismissive of civil liberties. The challenge is getting the details right, and that is not simple.
Which is why the president is punting those details to others. While he did say decisively he no longer wants the NSA to hold the telephone metadata that has become a lightning rod, he's buying more time by giving administration officials and congressional leaders until March 28th to find a new way to store the data, making clear he's not ending any of the surveillance programs.
We have real enemies and threats.
A remarkable evolution for a president who ran for the office railing against what he suggested was out-of-control surveillance by George W. Bush.
This administration acts like violating civil liberties is the way to enhance our security.
One of that administration's architects, former Bush Attorney General Alberto Gonzales, praised today's speech.
Well, I think you get a little bit wiser when you put your hand on that Bible and all of a sudden the lives of every single American, you're responsible for that.
Some Democrats loyal to the president seemed unconvinced.
We moved too quickly under the guise of security and undermined too many of the rights, the privacy rights.
Democratic Senator Richard Blumenthal praised other moves, such as adding an independent privacy advocate to the FISA court, though he added, quote, the president's reform blueprint, while bold and courageous, is a first step, leaving a lot of work to be done.
What I heard was the president saying, if you like your privacy, you can keep it. But meanwhile, he's going to keep collecting all of your data.
The president has also evolved on Edward Snowden, initially dismissing him.
No, I'm not going to be scrambling jets to get a 29-year-old hacker.
Today was an acknowledgement that, for better or worse, Snowden has had a major impact.
The sensational way in which these disclosures have come out has often shed more heat than light.
Now, some of that heat, of course, included leaks revealing that the U.S. had listened in on the phone calls of world leaders. Today, the president promised that will no longer happen, though there was a caveat as well. He added, unless there's a compelling national security reason. Brett?
Ed Henry live on the North Lawn. Ed, thank you. So we've seen the policy and the politics. Now for the practical application. Here's Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge.
On the collection of Americans' phone records, the president's plan sounds dramatic and sweeping.
Because of the challenges involved, I've ordered that the transition away from the existing program will proceed in 2 steps.
But the reality is more nuanced. Mr. Obama's plan will reduce the amount of data the NSA can collect, and queries of the phone records will require court approval, with the exception of emergencies, which the president did not explicitly define.
This seems to me to be trending back to that pre-9/11 mindset.
While describing the president's overall plan as restrained, former CIA and NSA Director Michael Hayden says the changes come as the fallout from the Edward Snowden leaks is known. This week, the nation's senior counterterrorism official provided the most detailed public accounting. Matt Olson said terrorists are changing their tactics or moving, quote, to another forum, and in other cases just dropping out of our collection altogether. This is not an exaggeration. It is fact.
You've got the adversary, right, witting to what it is we're doing, taking countermeasures to make it more difficult for us to track them, and simultaneously we are reducing our agility in terms of chasing this moving target.
The president's plan, which calls for a third party to hold the phone records or so-called metadata instead of the NSA, seemed to ignore this testimony by the same experts who crafted the 46 recommendations.
Did you speak to the telephone companies to explore whether they are willing or able to hold the metadata.
We did speak with the telephone companies about that, and they obviously would rather not hold that data.
In a statement, the ACLU said, quote, the president's decision not to end bulk collection and retention of all Americans' data remains highly troubling. And NSA whistleblowers, whose claims were largely validated by the Snowden leaks, said the government must abandon its kitchen sink approach.
So if you do the targeted acquisition, you'll have all the information that is relevant to foreign threats or international crime.
People said to me, why are the Europeans so upset? Well, Europeans tell me they lived it. We haven't. We're headed towards that fascist kind of a construct.
Well, the administration has hung its hat on the notion that the collection of phone records is not nearly as intrusive as reading email content. This week, the former acting director of the CIA told Congress there isn't a sharp distinction. Both data sets are equally revealing, Brad.
Catherine, thank you. More on this with the panel. The Obama administration has responded to Canada's demand for a decision on the long-delayed Keystone XL pipeline project. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel tells us the White House does not share its northern neighbors' sense of urgency.
We're putting a lot of pressure on, and it's been 5 years, so way past time for a decision.
Pressure from all directions is building on President Obama over the Keystone XL pipeline. From the left, 18 environmental groups joined forces, sending this letter yesterday calling on Mr. Obama to embrace clean energy and climate action. Quote, we believe that continued reliance on an all-of-the-above energy strategy would be fundamentally at odds with your goal of cutting carbon pollution and would undermine our nation's capacity to respond to the threat of climate disruption. Today, Canada's Foreign Minister John Baird called on the U.S. to end this state of limbo about the pipeline project.
This is a great project for the future economic prosperity of Canada. It's a great project that will create a lot of jobs here in the United States.
Secretary of State John Kerry, at an event with his Canadian and Mexican counterparts, was asked about the holdup, and he cited the ongoing environmental impact study.
I can promise our friends in Canada that all the appropriate effort is being put into trying to get this done effectively and rapidly. And my hope is that before long that analysis will be available, and then my work begins.
Nearly a year ago, Kerry also tried reassuring the Canadians.
I don't want to pin down precisely when, but I assure you in the near term.
And yesterday in a hearing with EPA Administrator Gina McCarthy, Nebraska Republican Senator Deb Fischer hammered administration energy regulations and policies.
Americans can only expect even higher energy prices and greater job losses. Countries that have made shifts away from fossil fuels are now finding such policy positions to be untenable.
Polls taken last year show the American people support the project by more than 2 to 1. And with a weak jobs report last week, supporters say it is a no-brainer. But for the president, that would create conflict with a key component of his base. Brett?
Mike Emanuel live on the Hill. Mike, thank you. More employers are looking for help and more employees are quitting. That's the latest word from the Labor Department. Job openings reached 4 million in November, a 5.5-year high. About 2.5 million people quit, the most in 5 years. Those are both interpreted as good signs for the job market. Competition for open jobs is down from 6.7 people per opening in 2009 to 2.7 in November. Stocks were mixed today. The Dow gained 41.5. The S&P 500 lost 7. The Nasdaq fell 21. For the week, the Dow gained 0.13 of a percentage point. The S&P 500 lost 0.2. The Nasdaq was up about 0.5. Up next, President Obama desperately tries to get fellow Democrats to support his Iran policy. But first, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. Fox 25 in Oklahoma City with word from Republican Senator Tom Coburn that he will leave office 2 years early. Coburn, who is battling a recurrence of prostate cancer, says the decision was not due to his health. Fox 45 in Dayton, Ohio, where the children of a man executed by lethal injection yesterday say they will sue the state because they say the unusually slow execution amounted to torture. And this is a live look at San Francisco from our affiliate there, KTVU. The big story there tonight is Governor Jerry Brown's declaration that California is in the midst of perhaps its worst dry spell in a century. Brown says the drought conditions there are putting residents and their property in extreme peril. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.